and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme I'll be talking to supermodel Murray Helvin, to Iraq's ambassador to the UK and to an American bishop representing the Church of Uganda. All that will be explained later. But first of all, a comment, probably even a joke, made by the New Zealand Prime Minister has ignited a debate about whether the country should become a republic. New Zealand, of course, has been independent from Britain for 60 years, but still has the Queen, Queen Elizabeth, as head of state. Helen Clark, the country's leader for 8 years, wondered whether the time might have come to remove the Union Jack from the New Zealand flag, seen by some as a first step towards a republic. Well, Prime Minister Clark was in Europe this week to commemorate the First World War Battle of Passchendaele, and I met her in London and invited her to give me her views about the flag.
Well, I floated almost in jest last week when we had a major symposium day around Dominion Day, the centenary of when New Zealand ceased to be a colony of the British Empire and became a dominion within the British Empire. I floated that perhaps one way of dealing with the flag would be simply to take the Union Jack out of the corner. I understand that this brought forth an unprecedented swathe of emails and texts to the daily newspapers, and it's a raging debate. But what I know is that whatever the New Zealand flag is going to be, it won't be my personal choice. It has to be quite a long and considered process. You'd probably need to run a national design competition. You'd have to have a real feeling that it was time to have change and build a consensus around it. Now, a couple of years ago, a group did try to get a referendum up on it and couldn't get enough signatures, which probably tells you the level of interest wasn't great enough. But at some point, it will be.
And what about the issue of the, apart from the flag, the issue of the question of a republic? I mean, that reflects a lot of what you just said about the flag, I think, in the sense that, again, there doesn't seem to be a massive pressure for it at the moment, and so it's something you would quite favour someday. Is that your position?
I think it's a question of not if but when, but the time is not now. In the opinion surveying done on it, about 40% are saying, yes, New Zealand should become a republic, but of course that leaves about 60% who are not saying that. Now, in time, I think there will be a generation which will address the issue of New Zealand having its head of state formerly based in New Zealand. But Kiwis are kind of practical people. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, is the general attitude. Their attitudes, I think, towards the present Queen are very benign and friendly. To all intents and purposes, our head of state functions are performed on a daily basis by our Governor-General. We've happen to have a very popular Governor-General at the moment. So it's not a live issue for Kiwis. Now, if Australia went to a referendum and that referendum passed for a republic, that would get people chattering more in New Zealand. But at the moment, it's below the threshold as an issue.
And particularly will probably stay that way, certainly as long as the Queen is alive, probably, because that's a historic tie that goes back through wars that you're commemorating and other things as well.
It certainly does, and also people are very mindful of the role of her late father and her late mother in terms of the steadying and rallying influence they were for people throughout the empire, as it was then, through the war. Now, that's not to say that Prince Charles is badly thought of. In fact, I think he's quite well thought of in New Zealand. New Zealand is a country which cares a lot about the environment, and Prince Charles has a well-known reputation for caring about issues that are salient to us. So I think his level of acceptance is really quite good in New Zealand.
And is there any way that you think you could intervene helpfully, perhaps as a go-between, in the current sadness that is Myanmar?
I think there is a role for New Zealand, particularly because of the growing closeness and intensity of relations that we have with East Asia. We are a founding member of the East Asian Summit, which has its third meeting coming up in Singapore in November. It's a summit that's been generated out of the ASEAN series of summits. ASEAN started with +3 summits with China, Japan and Korea. It's brought in India. Then the idea of a broader East Asian community developed, and at that point Australia and New Zealand were invited to come to the table. So we're in those settings, we're interacting an enormous amount with the leadership of East Asia. And what we can see now is growing pressure from other ASEAN countries on Burma. We can see also China becoming a little bit more forthright.
And you've got a special relationship in a way with China, a closer relationship that many people have, don't you? That might be helpful.
Our Deputy Prime Minister was in China in the last week or so and was able to raise the issue directly with Premier Wen at that time, probably one of the earliest leaders to be able to raise it with him. But yes, we do have a strong relationship. As you can imagine, nobody could be more different than New Zealand and China. Our 4 million people, their 1.2 billion, different culture.
Yes, they do slightly outnumber you.
Outnumber us a little, but nonetheless, they think well of us. We have a reputation going back to the efforts of early missionaries and teachers there, which they've valued. And we are on track, I believe, to be the first Western country to sign a free trade agreement with China, which in Europe is often thought of as terribly bold on our part, but we're seeing only opportunity in the China relationship.
And in terms of elections, you're already the seventh longest serving Prime Minister, and then you're on the way up the list, and you could be the longest serving Prime Minister in 2013. Would you like to go on that long?
Well, I evaluate what I'm doing every election, every term, because I think staying in a job like this is dependent on a number of factors beyond oneself. Obviously, one's own level of fitness, energy and enthusiasm for the job is important, but you also have to have the backing of your party, and you have to have the backing of New Zealanders as a people. So if all the moons are in alignment, you do your best to carry on doing a good and professional job, but there will be a time when not all moons are in alignment.
And at the moment, the polls, your potential opponent is slightly ahead in the polls.
Slightly ahead. We, of course, follow the parallels here in Britain reasonably closely, because there's a tendency for style to be emulated, if you like, around the world. So that's of great interest to us. But look, I take the view that we're a government coming towards the end of its 8th year. Of course, when there's a new kind of Conservative leader, people are going to have a close look at that. But at the end of the day, I truly believe that Conservative parties in New Zealand have a set of policies which dare not speak their name. In other words, once you get their real intentions out around privatisation of your school system, your hospital system, your public assets and companies, the people start to see through it. And we're now at that point in the process. I might say this leader is the 5th one that I've faced as leader of the Labour Party over the time I've been leader.
A war of attrition goes on.
Absolutely.
Very, very successfully. And if Gordon Brown says to you, now look here, Helen, you've done almost 8 years as Prime Minister, and he says, and I've just started, and what piece of advice would you give me? What piece of advice would you give him?
Well, if I were to presume to give Gordon Brown advice, he's a very experienced politician. But my advice would be just to, call it as you see it. I operate on the basis that you will be well respected as a leader if you're straight with people. People don't have to agree with everything that you say, but they do look to you for leadership on the issues. And in our small, intimate democracy, I'm asked for an opinion on just about everything, and I'm inclined to give it. I mean, there's some things where I don't particularly have an opinion, but they're rather few in number. But people like to know what you're really about. They don't like to see an image or a facade. They want to know what is driving you, what is motivating you. And from what I've seen of Gordon Brown, he's a very straightforward person, and I'm personally thrilled as a Labour Prime Minister to see how well his early months have gone.
And at the end of this week, you've got an exhilarating task to go along to the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff to watch New Zealand in action against France.
Yes, we hope it's exhilarating, and on their form it should be exhilarating. But we are going to host the Rugby World Cup in 2011, with the final games played about 3 blocks from my home in Auckland, and it would be the most wonderful thing for New Zealand to be able to host that cup in the position of being the defender of it as well.
And then you've got another very different mood, but before that, the commemoration of Passchendaele, which was a terrible day in the First World War, wasn't it? Particularly for New Zealand.
That's correct. The 12th of October 1917, with the New Zealanders going into the Battle of Passchendaele, was the worst ever military disaster for us in terms of lives lost in a single day. No New Zealand family probably was untouched by it at the time. I had a great uncle at Passchendaele, and one of the reasons I was so motivated to have an outstanding New Zealand memorial erected at Hyde Park Corner in London is because I think it's important that people not forget the sacrifices that earlier generations of New Zealanders made alongside Britain in the wars of the 20th century.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Helen Clark there. In a moment I'll be talking to one of Iraq's top diplomats and asking him whether private security firms are out of control on the streets of Baghdad.